Back in the days of myth and legend, my family and I had made the federally mandated summer trip out to visit the Grand Canyon, one of the unofficial 7 wonders of the natural world. Even though I recall really enjoying the excursion, as the years have worn on, my memory has been reallocated for ever-increasing important factoids, such as Katy Perry song lyrics, and as a result, I don't really remember much of the details. Thus, when my dad contacted me about a hiking expedition deep into the belly of the famed national park, I readily accepted. The crew would comprise of my dad, Chris, my cousin Charlie, Don, and myself. Having previously topped Mount Kilimanjaro on my last major outdoor adventure, I was jazzed over the prospect of traversing into the heart of another massive landmark.
Oh, yeah, I see it wedged.
Our game plan was to start early Thursday morning at the North Rim, hike down the North Kebab Trail, and then spend the night at the Bright Angel Campground. Friday would be spent on some side hikes around the Colorado River, and Saturday was our planned big push out with the goal to reach the top of the South Rim sometime around noon. As giddy as I was for the hike itself, I was also primed for the 2 nights at the bottom of the canyon. I saw it as a throwback to my classic Boy Scout days, where all that was standing between you and the awesome, uncontrollable forces of nature was a sheer piece of nylon stretched out over a set of ultra-thin, wobbly plastic poles. Who wouldn't want to sleep like that? So, come Thursday morning, we were up early, off to the trailhead, and after bidding a fond adieu to May and my mom, the Hiker Force 5 began our trek into the bowels of the Grand Canyon. Of the 3 main paths, the North Kebab Trail is listed as the canyon's least hiker-friendly, as it is both the longest one and the one with the greatest elevation change. In fact, as I discovered later, the park recommends that you do not attempt to hike the whole trail in one day due to its difficulty, which, of course, is exactly what we were attempting. After a couple of hours, we had gone down in elevation about 1,440 feet, almost the equivalent of 5 American football fields. By now we were traversing alongside the red walls of the canyon, a stark contrast with the topmost white rock layer. At times it looked as if someone had taken a giant knife and sliced away the surrounding sides, as if it was the world's largest national park themed 2-layer cake, topped with delicious green frosting trees. Come to think of it, that sounds incredibly delicious and wicked sick. Get on that, internet. Another visually striking aspect of the hike is that traversing the North Kebab Trail entails passing through every ecosystem you'll find between Canada and Mexico. Besides the telltale signs of going from fir trees and aspens to cacti with sparse grass, the most obvious difference is the vast temperature difference between the rims and the canyon bottom. The gap can be over 30 degrees, so while May and Mom would be covered up in a room at night staving off the cold, we would be sleeping in our tents with the flaps open to allow in a refreshing breeze. At this point in the hike, we were being assaulted with awesome examples of OSHA non-compliance. Open cliffs leading to drops of several hundred feet cheerfully greeted us around every turn, and often the trail edge was a mere few feet away. Did I mention the steep incline and loose footing of the trails? Consider it mentioned.
I wouldn't get that close to the edge, Matt, with that backpack.
We now had traveled a depth of 3,641 feet. This is the equivalent of the main span on the George Washington Bridge in Upper Manhattan. You no doubt recall this bridge from the famed opening sequence of the game Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty, as it's one of the least LSD-inspired moments in the game. Welcome to the Pump House, which really sounds like an upcoming Quentin Tarantino film. Here you can rest in the shade, refill your water bottles, assuming the water pipes haven't ruptured, and use one of the surprisingly clean and pleasant-smelling composting restrooms. The Pump House used to be the residence of a park employee who was also a painter, and aside from the appalling lack of nearby pizza shops or frozen custard stands, you could easily understand the allure of living here. We were now 4,521 feet lower than where we started, a length of 4 USS Enterprise aircraft carriers laid end to end. Well, assuming that more than one existed. And also assuming that the military wouldn't mind you borrowing them for a measurement.
That's good. My socks are soaking up the blood.
Out and away from the towering cliff walls, we merrily made our way through the happy valley of Heapstroke. We elected to take a side detour to Ribbon Falls, for despite the blistering pain my feet had developed, it was a highly impressive sight that we were able to investigate up close. The image of a moss-covered boulder inadvertently forming the face of some unnameable eldritch horror only made me cherish the experience even more.
Alrighty, Manny.
Almost.
The most grueling part of the hike was, without question, the box. This part of the canyon was a twisted and circuitous path that stretched for miles and seriously sapped my endurance. Not just because each step was an explosion of pain due to my feet not being properly prepared for the task of hauling around pounds of extraneous gear, but also because it severely tested my will. I knew once we exited the box we would finally be close to the campgrounds, so I hoped each bend we turned would reveal the promised land, but instead, each bend merely led to another bend. It was as if we were in an episode of The Twilight Zone sponsored by National Geographic. At long last, after having traveled a distance more than 2 Burj Khalifas below the North Rim, we arrived at the Bright Angel Campgrounds. Nested deep in the valley, the area provided shade, running water, and a dining hall where we would feast on hot and convenient, if not entirely tasty, table service meals.
Maybe I'll go brush my teeth.
We were so relieved to finally make it, we even overlooked the apparent picnic table murder crime scene that was just down the trail from our campsite. Even though we had just arrived, we were already pondering the looming hike up to the South Rim. The long hike down had taken a greater toll than anticipated, and hauling all of our gear back up on our deeply pained feet did not inspire confidence. But, as it turned out, we had an ace in the hole: mule bags. Each day, a mule supply train shuffles up and down the trails between the rim and the campgrounds carrying supplies. For a nominal fee, one can reserve mule bags to stuff your gear into and allow the mules to haul it up. Chris, always ahead of the pack, had already secured 3 mule sacks for the 5 of us, and after a fast admission of our current questionable state, we reserved 1 more. This wonderful and potentially life-saving arrangement has left me with a deep and fond appreciation of a great ass. Friday morning saw us up early for breakfast, and then we were off on a hobbling hike down to the Colorado River. We wanted to check out the 2 main spans by the campgrounds, the aptly named Black Bridge and the equally creative named Silver Bridge. The Black Bridge was the span for those coming from the South Kebab Trail, whereas the Silver Bridge handled traffic from the Bright Angel Trail. We'd be hitting up the Silver Bridge Saturday morning, but it would be dark out when we crossed, so now was the time to take in the views. And what views they were. Later that day, we had a chance to speak to some of the park workers, where something else came up that I never really thought about before, namely, going to work at the campgrounds and the nearby Phantom Ranch. Apparently, they have to hike in and out for each of their shifts, and given that this would put to shame even the biggest extreme commuter, each shift actually lasts 10 days, followed by 4 days off. That means that they hike to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and back about 26 times a year. I feel bad for the future kids of these workers, as these people can really lay claim to the phrase, "When I was your age, I hiked over 9 miles to get to work. Uphill!" We were up long before sunrise and wasted no time in breaking camp, eating breakfast, and striking out. Despite the long path before us and the weary feet beneath us, we were excited and ready to finish off the famed rim-to-rim hike. For the most part, my video camera was tucked away, allowing me to focus on keeping my pace up. Hence, pretty much from here on out will be still images. There were a lot more people that we noticed on the trail this time. I suspect it was because it was the weekend, helped by the fact that we couldn't have asked for better weather. Indeed, for the whole hike there was never a cloud in the sky, and while it got hot in parts of the canyon, it was very comfortable in the shade. The Bright Angel Trail provides some spectacular views of the canyon, but even more awesome was the fact that due to the fairly straight direction it went, not counting the endless switchbacks, you could always look back and easily point out parts of the trail that you had been on over 4 hours ago, and say, hey, remember when each step wasn't a tortured cry from deep in your soul? At this point, things started to get a bit surreal because now we were running across more and more people in street clothes who weren't even carrying water bottles or wearing running gear. We were just 1.5 miles from the rim, so these poor, unsuspecting souls were tourists who thought it would be cool to come down to the first rest house on the trail, take in the views, and then start a sprightly jaunt back up. And yes, the first 2 parts of that plan are easy enough, but the last part? Well, a 1.5 mile hike down a series of steep switchbacks is a lot easier than a 1.5 mile hike back up the same path. At long last, there we were, taking our final strides to the top. I felt a distinct tonal shift as we hiked out with sun-baked skin, dusty backpacks, and marred hiking boots into this realm of sneakers, designer hoodies, and cell phone selfies. In a way, it was almost like a trip back in time. Each step downward took us further from the present until, upon reaching the canyon floor, there was no cell phone service, no trash cans, you had to pack out your own trash, and no rows of street lamps, making for a stunning night sky. Now, as we returned to the wonders of modernity, it filled me with a curiosity and amusement, like an explorer first arriving at some strange and exotic land. And in this rediscovered world, I found myself much more interested in things like a hot shower and clean clothes, rather than instant communications or processed foods. The yawning maw of the Grand Canyon can really only be fully appreciated in person, and the extended jaunt deep into its heart provided an excellent way to experience its breadth and depth. This sojourn also added to my life's resume, as, apparently, only 1% of the park's visitors ever managed to hike all the way down to the bottom. So hey, I'm now officially part of the 1%. Ain't that a kick?
Half-hour break here somewhere along the line.
Okay.